Hey everyone, Alex from Alex's Autism Acceptance channel here. Today I got a very important video for you guys about how much harder it is to handle prison life when you have a disability such as autism. We're going to get into this and I'm going to give you some good information. I'm also going to give you some resources about how to help these people who are in just a horrible situation. So please like, subscribe, and share. And without further ado, let's get into how people with autism handle prison. When Drew Harrison was in prison, just sitting in his cell overloaded his senses. To dim the fluorescent lights, he covered the bulbs with toothpaste or paper. To mask overwhelming odors, he wrapped his uniform around his head. Once, when he asked to stay longer in the prison yard, Harrison, who has autism, said he was told he was being insubordinate and was put in restrictive housing. Another time, he requested placement in solitary confinement so he wouldn't have to interact with people, which he found stressful. After 2.5 years, Harrison, who had been convicted of sexually assaulting an ex-girlfriend, thought he would get out more than a month early from Greensville Correction Center in Virginia because of good behavior. But because he had failed to sign up for a job while incarcerated earlier at Virginia prison, he had forfeited his chance at early release, according to documentation from the Virginia Department of Corrections. Harrison's autism made it difficult for him to grasp the rules, his mother explained. Only after she lobbied a Virginia state legislator was her son's good time reinstated. He was released in 2019. I don't know how someone with Drew's diagnosis would have survived in prison without an advocate. Honestly, I don't either. I really don't. You can't teach someone not to have autism. That's true. You're born with it and it never goes away. The prison environment, with its loud, unpredictable noises, bright lights, unpleasant odors, complicated social dynamics, and often Byzantine bureaucracy, would be difficult for anyone to navigate. But experts say that it's particularly challenging for autistic people and people with similar disabilities. The Americans with Disabilities Act, signed into law 30 years ago this summer, mandates that people with physical and developmental disorders receive equal access to programs and services provided by public institutions, including correctional facilities. But advocates for people with developmental disabilities, which is me, have long argued that all too often prisons do not fulfill that promise. It's interesting. One reason may be that many states don't adequately identify prisoners with developmental disorders. The Marshall Project sent questions to all 50 state corrections departments asking whether and how they screen prisoners for developmental or intellectual disabilities. Of the 38 agencies that responded, 25 reported using screen protocols that several mental health and legal experts said don't meet professional standards. 5 states said they don't screen for developmental disabilities at all. When developmentally disabled prisoners go unidentified, they are even less likely to receive services they are entitled to under federal law, such as help understanding prison rules or obtaining medications. That loss of assistance leaves them vulnerable to medical misdiagnosis, isolation and solitary confinement, denial of legal and educational opportunities, sexual abuse, and bullying, prisoner advocates and relatives say. It mirrors or echoes what goes on in society, that's true. People with disabilities are often hidden and not seen, said Susan Pollitt, a supervising attorney at Disability Rights North Carolina, an advocacy agency. But behind bars, the situation can be even more dire. They get out in worse condition than they go in. I assume so. Experts say that incarcerated people of color with intellectual and developmental disabilities are affected disproportionately because they are less likely than their white counterparts to be diagnosed before they enter prison. Developmental disability is an umbrella term for a group of disorders that start during childhood and restrict one's ability to learn, speak, behave, or physically develop. They include autism, cerebral palsy, language, and speech disorders. The most common type is intellectual disability. It is generally accepted that 2 to 3% of people around the world have an intellectual disability, said Maggie Nygren. The proportion of people with developmental disabilities behind bars is likely to be higher than the general population, research suggests. The ARC, a nonprofit that advocates for people with disabilities, estimate that between 4 and 10% of U.S. prisoners have an intellectual disability, a range supported by recent literature. In 2015, the Bureau of Justice Statistics reported that about 20% of prisoners mentioned having a cognitive disability, a category that includes developmental disability. But when the Marshall Project contacted state corrections departments, only 4 of the 25 states shared their 2019 numbers reported that the population of prisoners with intellectual disabilities was in that range. The other 21 states said that prisoners with developmental disabilities made up less than 4% of the prison population. One disability rights lawyer characterized those low numbers as implausible. There's no rational basis under which a prison population should have a lower percentage than a general population, said Bill Vanderpool. 13 states told the Marshall Project that they did not track the population numbers or could not provide them. Many states are using screening protocols that medical and legal experts say are far below professional standards. An exam should assess a person's intellect, capacity to participate in daily activities, and the age at which their condition began, said Nygren. But 11 states said they did not check for those 3 diagnostic points or didn't test for intellectual ability at all. Now, this is a problem for people who are looking to function in that society. Several states said that they rely primarily on an IQ test as a screening tool. In North Carolina, prisoners take an IQ test in a group upon entering the system. If they get a score of 70 or less, the state's cutoff for a disability, prisoners take the exam again. But this process prevents people with intellectual disability from being identified because it fosters familiarity with the exam, often resulting in higher scores, said John Swade, a former prison psychologist. Representatives from the NCDPS said that 1.8% of prisoners in 2019 tested with an IQ of 70 or less, well below the expected percentage. It's probably because they retake them. Think about that. According to a document obtained by the Marshall Project, one prisoner scored 60 on the IQ test when first taking it, but after setting for the same test again a few days later, the prisoner scored 83, which is in the normal range. The screenings for intellectual disability are not designed to identify and provide help to inmates, but instead exclude as many inmates as possible from receiving the help they need. And that right there is what the prison system does. That's what it does. It's one of the most corrupt systems in America. The consequence for disabled prisoners in the state has been a total failure to accommodate and protect. John Bull, the communications officer for prisons at the North Carolina Department of Public Safety, said the state's strategy allows officials to quickly identify prisoners with disabilities without wasting time on those who don't need extra help. Of the other states that test prisoners during screening, 8 said they use the test of adult basic education, which is designed to evaluate academic achievement, not IQ. Experts say that the exam could give hints about a person's disability, but it isn't designed to identify developmental disabilities. Officials in 5 other states said their agencies don't use a test to screen prisoners for developmental disorders. In Maine, for the most part, clinicians estimate a good intellectual level of below average, average, or above average. In Delaware and New Mexico, officials say they rely on medical and educational records to identify people who are diagnosed with a disability before entering the system. In Morrill, whose 37-year-old son, David, is serving time for Louisiana for possession of child pornography, said prison officials have no clue that he is mentally challenged. David was first diagnosed with intellectual disability at age 6, he said. At age 25, he was told he had an IQ of 63. David often gets scammed, his mother said, by prisoners who persuade him to buy things with the money she gives him for food. She also believes that her son has been taken advantage of sexually. Anything anyone would tell him, Morrill said, he would just do. That is a very big problem in the autism community. Autistic people and people with intellectual disability often have difficulty understanding prison rules and norms, that makes sense, making them especially vulnerable to exploitation in prison, says Jamelia Morgan, an associate professor at the U of C School of Law. There's disproportionate exposure to violence, sexual or otherwise, she added. Some parents of incarcerated people with developmental disorders say they feel powerless to help their children cope behind bars. I would too. Gary Glissman of Nebraska said that when his adult son, Michael, spent 3 months in an Omaha jail for theft, he submitted medical documentation to health officials demonstrating that Michael had a clinical need for testosterone, therapy, and psychological counseling. Michael suffers from depression and anxiety related to Klinefelter syndrome, a genetic developmental disability that can lead to abnormally low levels of testosterone and difficulty controlling emotions in moments of stress. Glissman said he wasn't surprised that the officers weren't responsive. It's very basic in the prison system, he said. Either it's broken or bleeding, or too bad. So, what are my thoughts on this? My thoughts are that it's pretty sad what these prisons are doing. It really is. For the record, I'm not saying that what these people did was okay. Some of this is some pretty bad stuff, and they do deserve to be punished for that, but they also deserve to be rehabilitated and given basic needs and really just treated like a human being. Because I gotta be honest, the how the prison system handles this stuff, they handle it like shit. They handle it horribly, and we need to change that. So, I mean, people do wrong things all the time, but I don't believe in bad people. I believe in bad choices. There are really some people who don't belong there. Most people don't belong there. So, in the comments and the description, I'm going to give you guys a bunch of resources where you can help out these people in need, because these people are on their own out there. They're at the complete mercy of the prison system, and when that happens, things don't go well. So, thank you guys for listening. Please like, subscribe, and share. See you in the next one.